Around the year 256, in a region of ancient France called Narbonne, a boy was born who would change the history of faith in a way that no one could imagine. His name was Sebastian. His father was a native of Narbonne, and his mother came from Milan in the heart of Catholic Italy. From childhood, he grew up between two worlds, his paternal heritage and his mother's deep faith. But the world around him was dangerous. Being a Christian at that time did not just mean difficulty, it meant risking one's own life. This 3rd century saint became the patron of dozens of cities around the world, from Rome to Latin America and Asia. His image was immortalized by the greatest masters of sacred painting, from Botticelli to Perugino, and after the recent pandemic that shook the world, devotion to him has resurfaced with renewed strength. Saint Sebastian is the patron saint of soldiers, athletes, and archers, and is a protector invoked against diseases and epidemics. His story reveals why the Church consecrated him as a guardian against plagues. It is a narrative that brings to mind great historical epics, such as Ben-Hur or the fall of the Roman Empire, but with a crucial difference. It actually happened. He was a Christian infiltrated into the personal guard of Emperor Diocletian, the leader of the most powerful empire in the world. The question that spans the centuries is, how was the man closest to the emperor precisely the Christian he most desired to eliminate? We were in the 3rd century under the rule of Diocletian, when the most organized and brutal persecution in Christian history occurred. While the faithful filled the imperial prisons and families were separated, one man walked freely through the palace corridors. Sebastian had reached a position that few could achieve: captain of the Praetorian Guard, the military elite that personally protected the emperor. He had direct access to the man who ordered hundreds of arrests of Christians. He slept under the same roof. He participated in meetings. He knew the plans, and Diocletian had no idea who was truly by his side. How does someone keep their faith secret when serving alongside the man who persecutes their church? How do they preserve a pure heart serving in an army that arrests their brothers? The answer transcends simple courage. Sebastian did not join the army by accident. He enlisted strategically in the year 283 with a clear mission: to gain access to the prisons where Christians awaited their fate. It was intentional infiltration. While other soldiers saw only prisoners, he saw souls in need of hope. The spiritual tension he carried was real and heavy. On one side was the military oath and loyalty to the emperor. On the other was a greater mission: to strengthen the prisoners of faith. Each day represented a delicate balance between prudence and boldness. The scriptures speak of being as wise as serpents and as simple as doves. Sebastian lived this principle intensely. He possessed military wisdom. He knew when to act, when to remain silent, and how to move without raising suspicion. But he maintained absolute purity of heart. Sebastian grew up in Milan, the heart of Christianity in the West. He breathed the faith from childhood, but he learned a painful lesson early on. Professing Christ publicly was extremely dangerous. There he learned about the martyrs and heard the stories of men and women who preferred to lose everything rather than deny the name of Jesus. Those stories were not distant legends. They were close realities, neighbors who disappeared and did not return. While other young Christians dreamed of a contemplative life far from persecution, Sebastian discerned something different. He observed the empire and saw an opportunity where others saw only a threat. The Roman legions were the key to accessing the most guarded places. He belonged to the Roman middle class, an ideal position to go unnoticed. In the year 283, Sebastian did the unthinkable. He enlisted in the army of Emperor Carinus, the same ruler who ordered punishments against Christians. His family was in shock. The community began to doubt him. But Sebastian had a plan that no one understood. He did not see the army as an end. He saw it as a means. He sought access to the prisons where his brothers awaited uncertain fates. God's call does not always present itself as we expect. What seemed like madness to human eyes was divine direction. God was not calling him to flee the empire. He was calling him to be inside it, to be the salt that preserves even in the midst of corruption. The army saw only another reliable soldier. But God saw a missionary in training, someone who would learn military strategy to apply it in a greater war. The spiritual war for the salvation of souls. In the year 286, Diocletian took over the empire and began the most systematic persecution in Christian history. It was a persecution organized like a military operation. Lists of Christians were drawn up, properties were confiscated, leaders were arrested in mass. And at the center of this command was Sebastian, promoted to captain of the Praetorian Guard. The Praetorian Guard was the innermost circle of power. These were soldiers chosen not only for skill, but for absolute loyalty. Sebastian underwent rigorous testing and character investigations. How did a secret Christian go through all of this without being discovered? He was an exceptional soldier. He was strategic. He was too reliable to be suspected. The mission began in the imperial prisons. Christian prisoners lived in literal and spiritual darkness. Many entered firm in their faith, but after weeks of solitude, they began to falter. As captain, Sebastian had unrestricted access. No one questioned his inspections, and during every official visit, clandestine evangelization took place. The first recorded operation was the strengthening of the couple Marcus and Marcellinus. They were imprisoned, awaiting execution, and beginning to doubt. Sebastian entered that cell and transformed despair into courage. His presence was a reminder that they were not forgotten. His words renewed hope. Historical records document 64 conversions and strengthenings carried out by Sebastian over 3 years. To our modern mindset, this may seem modest, but consider the impossible context. Every conversation was at the risk of death. Every word could be his last. And even so, 64 souls were rescued from despair. But something caught the attention of the authorities. Prisoners who should have been broken manifested excessive firmness. Interrogators noticed a pattern. Someone was strengthening the prisoners, someone close to power. The investigation began, and when Diocletian discovered that his captain of the guard was a Christian, the personal betrayal was devastating. Sebastian was confronted. Diocletian offered him everything, wealth, power, and a high position, if he would publicly renounce his faith. But Sebastian had strengthened others not to renounce. How could he himself deny Christ? He firmly refused, and the emperor ordered an exemplary public execution. He was taken to the field of Mars, a terrain he knew intimately. Archers from Mauritania were summoned, the best in the empire. Sebastian was tied to a stake. The arrows began to fly. One after another, they pierced his body. When they finished, they left the body riddled with arrows, certain that he was dead. But he was not dead. A Christian widow named Irene came to collect the body. As she approached, she noticed movement. Sebastian was alive. She took him secretly to her home and cared for him until he fully recovered. It was an undeniable miracle. The wounds that should have killed him healed. And here comes the most impressive part. Sebastian could have fled. He could have lived in hiding for the rest of his life. But he chose to return. Once recovered, he went to the imperial palace and publicly confronted Diocletian. He openly declared his faith. He prophesied against the persecution. This time, the emperor did not use arrows. He ordered him to be beaten to death. His body was thrown into the sewers of Rome. But Saint Lucina had a vision that revealed the exact location. She recovered the body and buried it in the catacombs, along with the apostles. It was approximately the year 288. Sebastian was 32 years old. He had served 3 years in an undercover mission. There were 64 recorded conversions, and he left a legacy that would span millennia. In the year 367, Pope Damasus I built a basilica over his tomb, which became one of the 7 main churches of Rome. But the true manifestation of his intercession happened in the year 680, during a devastating epidemic. The desperate population cried out for the intercession of Saint Sebastian, and the plague stopped abruptly. From then on, he became the patron saint against epidemics. During the Black Death in the 14th century, when 1/3 of Europe perished, Saint Sebastian was massively invoked. Entire cities consecrated themselves to his protection. Survivors attributed their lives to his intercession. He became one of the 14 holy helpers, a group invoked in extreme crises. In 1575, another epidemic devastated Rome. Again, the intercession to Saint Sebastian was followed by the cessation of the plague, the pattern repeated through the centuries. And after our recent pandemic, devotion to him has resurfaced globally. The life of Saint Sebastian carries deep lessons. First, God places saints in unlikely places. Sebastian proved that a holy presence exists in any environment. His vocation did not seem spiritual. It seemed only like a military career. But in the hands of God, it was transformed into an instrument of grace. Second, daily testimony matters. Sebastian gave his life daily for 3 years, keeping his secret and risking everything. The great public testimony was the consequence of thousands of small, silent testimonies. True courage is cultivated in the daily perseverance of small, right choices. Third, eternal fruit outweighs immediate impact. Sebastian strengthened 64 people in 3 years, but God multiplied that legacy through millennia. Today, millions know his story, invoke his intercession, and find strength in his example. For those who have lived decades of faith, Sebastian's story brings special comfort. Those years of daily prayer, of faithful Sunday Mass, of rosaries prayed, and of small acts of charity that no one noticed. None of that was wasted. Each small silent testimony builds a legacy that transcends generations. Seeds planted with faithfulness can bear fruit in grandchildren or great-grandchildren not yet born. For those facing illness or growing frailty, Saint Sebastian offers powerful intercession. He survived the arrows, but not to avoid suffering, to complete his mission. Suffering offered to God possesses redemptive value. Every pain and every limitation can be united to the sacrifice of Christ. For those who contemplate the legacy of an entire life, questioning if they made a difference, the answer is clear. Sebastian strengthened 64 people, an apparently modest number. But God sees what men do not see. That kind word spoken decades ago, that example of forgiveness, that persevering prayer for an estranged child, nothing was lost. Everything is kept in the heart of God. For grandparents worried about younger generations facing pressure to abandon their faith, Sebastian offers hope. He resisted for 3 years under an emperor who was actively persecuting. Current generations can resist in a culture that mocks but does not kill. Our persevering prayer, our example of faithfulness, and our intercession, everything has a power that crosses generations. Today, Saint Sebastian is the 3rd patron saint of Rome, the patron of Rio de Janeiro. Since 1565, the protector of soldiers, athletes, and archers, and a powerful intercessor against epidemics. His feast is celebrated on January 20th by the Catholic Church. In the Orthodox Church, it is on December 18th. Sebastian inspired Christians during the Black Death. He inspired soldiers in the World Wars who carried his medal. He inspired the faithful in totalitarian regimes who learned the art of Christian presence in hostile environments. And he inspired millions during the recent pandemic when the world cried out for protection against invisible diseases. If there is any doubt about the impact of a life, consider this. Sebastian strengthened 64 people. But God multiplied his legacy for millennia. True impact is not measured by what we see temporarily. It is measured by eternity. Saint Sebastian did not choose permanent silence. He returned after being healed. He confronted the emperor without fear. He prophesied necessary truths. He gave his life standing up, without backing down. His final courage was built upon years of silent daily faithfulness. As we contemplate our lives, Saint Sebastian calls us to perseverance in prayer, in the sacraments, in charity, and in humble but firm testimony. He calls us to trust that God sees, remembers, and multiplies our faithfulness in unimaginable ways. Saint Sebastian lived the Christian paradox, infiltrated in the empire, but never of the empire. He was close to power, but loyal to the eternal kingdom. And his life proclaims through 1,700 years, God does not call us to flee the world. He places us where we are to redeem it from within, one soul at a time, one prayer at a time, and one testimony at a time. And in eternity, we will understand that none of our faithfulness was wasted.